Hello everyone, welcome to another session of ILA Dialogues. Today we have with us Advocate Abhilaksh Grover. Abhilaksh has been practicing at the Punjab and Haryana High Court for close to 8 years now. He graduated from Nalsar University of Law before completing his master's at UC Berkeley. He started off as a corporate litigation lawyer with the top law firm JSA in New Delhi before starting his own practice at Chandigarh. He has a vast experience of handling all sorts of disputes before the Punjab and Haryana High Court and the NCLT. His focus areas are arbitration, commercial, civil litigation, and white collar crimes. Welcome, Abhilaksh. We're really glad to host you today. Today, Abhilaksh will be speaking on fraud and SFIO under the Companies Act 2013.
Thank you, Sudisha, and thank you, ILA, for giving me this opportunity to talk on today's topic, which concerns SFIO and the definition of fraud under the Companies Act of 2013. The Companies Act of 1956 underwent a huge transformation in 2013. Major amendments were carried out. And one of the interesting areas that I want to talk about in these amendments is the issue of prosecution. Of course, after India was raided by corruption scandals, the governments of the day thought that it is best to get some sort of a system where the complexities of economic offenses can now be treated, and they can be treated well by either the state police or outside agencies. Of course, there was the Prevention of Money Laundering Act of 2002, and subsequently, I think that gave power to the Enforcement Directorate to look into the economic offenses, the ED that we hear so much about these days. And the other such agency is the SFIO under the Companies Act of 2013, that is the Serious Fraud Investigation Office. It's a creation of the Companies Act. It is created under Section 211 of the Act, and it carries vast powers. In fact, carries powers to prosecute as well, which is why I think we need to talk about this, because there seem to be certain anomalies in the entire procedure which has been prescribed by the Companies Act 2013 with regard to the investigation and the prosecution that the SFIO can undertake. So as I said, the Serious Fraud Investigation Office was constituted under Section 211. Now it has powers to investigate into the affairs of the companies, most likely mismanagement of the companies, and it also has the power to prosecute for fraud, which is an offense under Section 447, defined under Section 447, along with certain other sections in the Companies Act, which, if found guilty under, are liable to be prosecuted under the section for fraud, which is Section 447. So to explain what I just said, Section 447 is a charging section. We'll start with that before I come down to the investigation and the procedures of SFIO. Section 447 of the Companies Act 2013 is a charging section. By that I mean that it carries the penalty for fraud. The section itself, the title itself says punishment for fraud, and punishment for fraud is maximum up to 10 years, minimum up to 6 months, and in case it hurts the public interest, then the minimum is 3 years. Interestingly, the definition of fraud as to what this punishment is for is carried in the explanation to that section. So here we have, I think, probably one of the few instances in Indian drafting, legislative drafting, where the charging section carries the definition of that particular offense in the same section as an explanation. Why this becomes problematic, I will tell you in just a second. But let's look at the explanation for a second. And what it says is that fraud in relation to affairs of the company, especially with respect to the Companies Act 2013, is any abuse of possession, any intent to deceive, to gain undue advantage, or to injure the interests of the company or the shareholders without having any wrongful gain or any wrongful loss. So loss or gain is immaterial. The intent to deceive is also something that can be prosecuted for. Then there is the issue of carrying an undue advantage. For the first time in any penal statute of the country, fraud has been defined. Fraud otherwise is mentioned in section 25 of the Indian Penal Code, where it says that intention to deceive is something which is fraudulent, and then there are multiple sections including 415, which says cheating, that carries the word fraud in it. So fraud in itself, since it is so obtuse, it is so vast, has not been defined in the Indian Penal Code, but various offenses, for example counterfeit currency, where that is done in with a fraudulent intention. So a lot of these areas in the Indian Penal Code carry the word fraudulent intention, rather than clubbing all of those offenses into one section and saying that all of this is fraud. Why this becomes problematic, especially in terms of the Companies Act 2013, is that, as I said, fraud is so abstract as a concept, and when you make that an offense in itself, anything and everything can be fraud, including oppression and mismanagement, which earlier in the Companies Act of 1956, one used to go to the Company Law Board under 397, 399, and now one can do that under section 213 of the Companies Act 2013. But whether that oppression and mismanagement becomes an area for prosecution of fraud, that is something which becomes debatable in terms of section 447, which defines fraud for the first time. Again, as I said, it's a charging section, but carries the definition in the explanation. Why this also makes a difference is that if you look at the next section, which is 448, 448 talks about punishment for false statement, or section 34 of the Companies Act, for that matter, which talks about furnishing false statements in the prospectus. So see, there can be different variations of cheating and fraud involved in terms of the affairs of the company also, right? And all of them have been listed out. All of them have been listed out in the Companies Act. But subsequently, what those sections say, as I said, misstatement for prospectus under section 34, or punishment for any false statement under section 448, it says that whoever does so or acts in such a manner, whatever is stated in the section, that he shall be liable under section 447. So it traces the punishment back to section 447, which is for punishment for fraud. Now what happens? Now, of course, we understand the situation where section 448, for example, someone is charged with section 448, then he is liable under section 447. So you're saying that he's made a false statement under section 448, which is why we are punishing him for fraud under section 447. But what happens when section 447 alone is attracted in a particular case without any of these other substantive sections? Becomes a problem, because section 447 is a charging section and the explanation carries the substantive offense, right? So it's very easy to ignore all other areas which have been mentioned in the Companies Act with regard to such cheating, instances of cheating or such instances of fraud, and just apply 447 because it is so convenient for the prosecution to say that 447 is attracted, so I'm going to prosecute, or so SFIO is going to prosecute the person under 447, and then apply the investigation procedure as enshrined in section 212. Now, the reason I'm talking about so much about 447 is that if you look at section 212, where the investigation procedure is prescribed by the SFIO, the heading of the section says investigation into the affairs of the company by the Serious Fraud Investigation Office. So it is the investigation into the affairs of the company by the SFIO. 212 lists out, as about 17 subsections, lists out the entire gamut as to how the investigation will take place. And in addition to other things, there are primarily 4 areas into how the investigation of SFIO can kick in. One is on receipt of a report of the Registrar of Companies. If the Registrar of Companies finds that there is some bungling going on in the affairs of the company, so and so is responsible, he can send a receipt to the SFIO, which is under the which is established under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. And again, Registrar of Companies is also under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. So These are two arms of the same wing. So he can send a receipt to the SFIO to look into the affairs of the company. The second is that a special resolution is passed by the company itself to say that there is some sort of a problem in the company, and the SFIO must investigate into the affairs. The third and the fourth are completely abstract. Third is in public interest. Fourth, on request of any department of the central government or a state government. So at the behest, at the drop of a hat, or at the annoyance of a government, the SFIO can start prosecution or can start looking into the affairs of the company. Why I link prosecution with SFIO is because the preceding section 210 says investigation into the affairs of the company, and that investigation is done by the registrar of companies and the inspectors which are appointed by the central government. Now this is only investigation. The inspector and the registrar of company can only investigate into the affairs of the company. 212, which I was talking about with regard to the investigation by SFIO, also carries the same leverage, but additionally SFIO can prosecute for the offenses under section 447 that we had spoken about earlier. And 2126, that is 212 subsection 6, is the most problematic of all, because that carries a reverse burden of proof when it comes to grant of bail. These twin conditions that it carries, and those are that at the moment when an accused charged under accused under section 447 in a prosecution by SFIO goes and applies for bail, then the court cannot grant him bail until and unless two conditions are satisfied. Number one, that the public prosecutor is given an opportunity to oppose the application of such release, and where he opposes the application, the court is satisfied that there are reasonable grounds to believe that he is not guilty of such an offense and he is not likely to commit an offense while on bail. So the entire fundamental of criminal law to say that prosecution shall establish beyond the guilt beyond reasonable doubt is turned topsy-turvy by these twin conditions, because here the first condition is that the public prosecutor is given an opportunity to oppose the bail. There is absolutely no problem with that, but it is in the second limb that the problem lies, that where the public prosecutor chooses to oppose such an application, so there is a possibility where he may not oppose the application. In that case, what does the court do? The section is completely silent. Where he opposes the application, the court has to believe that this person, the accused, is not guilty, which means that the accused has to show that I am not guilty. And subsequently has to have this in mind that he is not going to commit this offense subsequently. You see these conditions in the PMLA Act also, that is the Money Laundering Act under section 45. Section 45 was recently struck down by Justice Rohinton Nariman in Nikesh Tarachand Shah case 2018. Section 45 had a different idea. Of course, the issue of fundamentals of criminal law were definitely there in mind of the judge as well. But when we talk about offenses under the PMLA, PMLA does not exist in a vacuum. For PMLA to be attracted, there needs to be a scheduled offense, which is given in the schedule to PMLA, the offenses which are there in the IPC. For SFIO prosecutions, for Companies Act 2013 prosecutions, there is no such schedule. Section 447 can exist in a vacuum, or it can exist along with the sections which I originally mentioned, the instances which I had given, for example, 448 and section 34 of the Companies Act 2013. So these twin conditions were set aside with regard to PMLA by the Supreme Court in 2018, they still exist in Section 37 to the NDPS Act. They exist in the Maharashtra Organized Crime Control Act. They exist in TADA, and they exist in POTA. Now look at the common theme of these acts. All these acts are for heinous offenses, are where the interests of the state are prejudiced to such an extent where you can expect the accused to be of a level of such a mastermind level that he may commit these heinous crimes in future, which is why these twin conditions were essentially brought into these special acts. But when we talk about economic offenses, here the things are different. Here, when the investigation takes place, the investigation is going to be based on documentary evidence entirely. The documents are already filed with the registrar of companies. Even if there needs to be any search or seizure which relates to the documents at the hands of the accused of the company, they can be taken care of. But at the same time, this logic of applying twin conditions in an economic offense does not really make sense. So this, I think, is a major problem with this section. And 2126, these twin conditions are applicable only when a person is accused under section 447, which is the original section for fraud, which we had just spoken about initially. So here is a situation where the other sections of falsification of documents, of misstatement in the prospectus, so and so, all these other sections are completely rendered useless, because now to catch the accused, it is so easy to apply section 447 itself because of the explanation which is given, which defines fraud, which is completely abstract. So this is one big issue which the investigation under SFIO carries. Now, the other issues that we have with regard to this is, as I had mentioned, section 210, the preceding section, which also talks about investigation into the affairs of the company, but this time by the ROC and the inspectors which are appointed by the central government. A corresponding section to this is section 213, which is the next section. Section 213 is a section where 1/10 of the members can approach the NCLT, the shareholders, disgruntled shareholders. They can file an application for oppression and mismanagement. And if ultimately during the proceedings, the court finds that there has been fraud to the extent of section 447 by some of the persons, then in that case, it will order an investigation under section 210, which again, as I stated, is the investigation made by the inspector and the ROC. Once they submit a report to the court, then the court can direct SFIO to undertake an investigation. So what happens in such a case is that there is an unjust classification which is created. As I mentioned, if the central government on its own wants to launch an investigation into a company's affairs by the SFIO, it can do so. And it can cite the reasons of public interest. That's very easy. The person who is involved, or the company which is involved in that prosecution, does not get the additional preliminary investigation that a company would get who has been referred to investigation under SFIO by the court, by the NCLT, on an application by the shareholders, because in that the preliminary investigation is undertaken by the inspector or the ROC. So this, I feel, is another unjust classification, and this is something that the courts will have to ultimately look into as to whether it is fair for a company which gets into the hands of the government immediately, or the SFIO, without there being any preliminary investigation by the inspector or the registrar of companies. Now, the other issues with regard to these, as I said, is that this is based on documentary evidence. So in a case where charge sheet is filed before arrest, where is the question of applying twin conditions to a person? The accused has to prove his innocence at the stage of bail when the charge sheet has already been filed. No requirement of his custodial interrogation. And the reverse burden of proof obviously is problematic. Another issue that SFIO and the investigation and prosecution carries is something that we see with the Enforcement Directorate also. Now, if you recount, the CBI was of course, the nodal agency for investigation by the central government, was created under the Delhi Special Police Enactments Act, Establishments Act. And the CBI cannot, since law and order is a state subject under the Constitution, CBI cannot directly walk into any ongoing matter. The state has to refer the matter to CBI, and then the CBI takes over, or it sends a request to the state for its approval or its sanction. But it cannot just take over an investigation, an ongoing investigation which is happening in a state. And similar is the case with other agencies, or should be the case with the other agencies like the ED and SFIO. SFIO has sole jurisdiction to investigate under Section 447 of the Companies Act. So if a local police gets the complaint under 406, 420, so and so, and 447 is also involved in that. 447, the cognizance of 447 cannot be taken by the local police. They'll have to send a report to SFIO or the central government or the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, who will then refer it to SFIO, and then SFIO will take over the investigation. Another section 211 and 212 specifically state that the SFIO will have sole jurisdiction over the matter and everyone else will have to move aside. Now, once law and order is a state subject, here the sweeping powers of SFIO that it has over companies registered in particular specific states, of course they are registered under the municipal aegis of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, no doubt about it. But if it is ultimately an issue of fraud, I am very sure that fraud will not exist in a vacuum. 447 cannot be without 406 or 420. Assuming even if it is without these IPC offenses, more likely chances are that this 447, a person who has committed an offense to such a big tune in a company, cannot do it alone. So there will be criminal conspiracy. 120B will be attracted at least. 120B again is under the IPC. Overlapping jurisdiction of the state police. Whether the SFIO now has power to investigate under 120B or not, doubtful completely, because the SFIO is a creation of the Companies Act. It cannot travel beyond 447. So even to unravel a conspiracy, it will have to take the help of the state police. And then you have parallel investigations going on. So this is another problem that you have. This is a problem that you don't find in PMLA because of the scheduled offense, which is given in the schedule to the PMLA. These offenses which are given. So that the ED has power to investigate. The SFIO doesn't have power to investigate to that extent. So this is going to be another issue when prosecutions under investigation take place. The issue of sanction is also there. Sanction is provided by the central government to investigate under 447. But again, if it comes down to the other offenses which are there in the IPC, whether the MCA can give sanction or not, that is also doubtful. Let's leave IPC aside for a second. Let's say during investigation, SFIO looks into or uncovers an offense of money laundering or instances where different shell companies have been created and money has been funneled into it for illegitimate purposes. In that situation, what happens? Does the ED now assume jurisdiction? If there is an IT fraud which is taking place, do the income tax department people, do they get into a parallel investigation? And ultimately, who files the charge sheet? Whose charge sheet, or would they be simultaneous charge sheets? Would an accused be charged separately under all of these? These are all questions which have unfortunately not been answered either in the act nor in the judgments which we find under the prosecution to SFIO. Frankly, that's because today most of the judgments which have come out by the Delhi High Court or by the Supreme Court are at the stage where bail has been declined. So the arguments with regard to reverse burden of proof and the twin conditions enshrined under 2126 are taking place with maximum force. But ultimately, of course, these sections have been challenged. The values of these sections have been challenged in the Supreme Court. And ultimately, when the Supreme Court does look into that petition, I'm very sure that all of these issues will have to be taken care of. And a lot of these sections do violate the provisions of the Constitution. I'm not talking, of course, I spoke about the issue with regard to the state list and the central list as well. But the basic issues of Article 21 are also hit by these sections. I'm not going into it because I'm sure that everyone is well aware of what Article 14 and Article 21 carries. But even those basic provisions, fundamental provisions of the Constitution are hit by these sections of the Companies Act 2013. So this is a problem which I see in a lot of these legislations that have come out with regard to the economic offenses. In order to, of course, we need to definitely curb the rise of economic offenses, and the human mind is so ingenuous that it will always try and find out new ways of creating fraud. So no matter how obtuse or how abstract a definition you fit in, it will never be enough. And it will always be used by the accused or the defense lawyers to say that XYZ is not covered in this section, or this section is not expansive enough for my client to be charged under. All of that will happen. But when you create a mechanism so drastic and so rigid to anticipate any sort of an offense that can take place, that will never happen. But with those rigors, you will stop economic activity. And what will happen is, let's see, the Money Laundering Act, which had twin conditions, was passed by the previous government. The 2013 Act was also passed by the previous government. And now a lot of those people today are finding themselves at the wrong end of the acts. And this is what happens when you have sweeping powers under the act. What we see with the NSA, with the other preventive detention acts that we have today, there is a huge potential to misuse them. And I hope that once these issues are taken up in court, there is some sort of reliability on the Constitution that takes place when we interpret these sections. That is my sincere hope, because I feel that the SFI, we have a short time, so I've just given you an overview of the entire process of investigation. But the problems are immense in the prosecutions, and the prosecutions have been launched all across the country. As I said, we're already at the stage where accused have not been granted bail. A lot of the accused have not been granted bail because of 2126 and are still in jails. But what happens when these sections, if like section 45 of the PMLA Act, are struck down? I don't know who will be answerable for the time that they have spent in jail because of the unconstitutionality of the sections. But that is, let's see, that it will be an interesting debate definitely in courts, and we look forward to that. That will be all, I think. Thank you so much, ILA, for giving me this opportunity. And Mr. Mistry has been a founding member of the ILA, has been pushing for the cause of ILA with much force, and really appreciate his endeavors. And thank you so much for inviting me for this talk. I hope that was useful. If there are any questions, I would love to answer them.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Because I have three, but they're very basic. So I'll just.
I'll be glad to answer them.
So yeah.
I have one question, if I may.
Yeah, sir, please.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Abhilaksh, very interesting. I mean, 447 and the fact that you have a charging section placed in the explanatory note. I mean, in the explanation to the section, I think that is truly unique. But what was the objectives when they introduced this? I mean, it would be very interesting to see why they have done this. I mean, we don't see this in the criminal code. We don't see this in IPC, and we've suddenly seen this here. I mean, do you think it's a bit of an overreach, or was it a mistake?
I think they should have been more careful with the drafting of the section, because I honestly, 15-minute talk, I spoke about at least 4 or 5 issues with the section, and I'm very sure that once someone goes deep into their own particular case, they'll be able to take out 20 such points in the section itself, barring the issue of investigation and the reverse burden of proof on the accused. But they should have been definitely more careful in drafting such sections. I don't think there was any requirement for introducing a section for fraud. There should have been a charging section, definitely, but there was no reason for giving an explanation to that section, because there are a lot of other sections in the Companies Act which say that if you do this, then you will be prosecuted, or you'll be liable. The word used is liable. They will be liable under Section 447. I think that was enough. But I think in their enthusiasm to make their case easier, the lack of clarity, I would say, suits the prosecution in this case. It is just easy to charge someone under 447 and just say, because fraud can be anything, right? So the age old maxim that they say that every deceit is not fraud, but every fraud definitely carries deceit. So it's just very easy to say that there has been an intention for fraud, and then you add the reverse burden of proof to say that the accused will be the one who will have to prove that whether there was intention or not. So there's no way for the accused to get out of it. It just makes their case very easy. The reasons, to answer your question, the reasons for them to do this, I think there was a huge pressure, as I said, with regard to the whole banks giving out loans without any credence, and then those loans were misused. They were never paid back. There were a lot of scams that took place. They were uncovered. People were not happy. So it was just, I think, it was just a knee-jerk reaction to the entire thing. They should have been more careful because what happens now is that for the fear of being prosecuted under these sections, the economic activity stops. That disrupts the economic chain. And that is what is happening when it comes to the other areas of, let's say, the banking sector also. When you see that such stringent measures are, you need to, I feel there should be regulation of these sectors rather than creating such drastic provisions. It's like bringing a gun to a knife fight. So I don't think that really helps the case. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Mystery.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so I had one. So it's like, so once the SFIO comes to know, what are the exact, or procedures that they follow? Is it like similar to how a criminal matter is treated?
Yes. So it's the SFIO, the section. I'll just tell you what the exact section is. This is section 21215, which says that the provisions of the Criminal Procedure Code would be applicable to the investigation which is undertaken by the SFIO. But the detailed procedure is given under 212, and so they undertake a preliminary investigation into the affairs of the company, and then collect the documents, and then the director of the SFIO has to verify some of that. Of course, I won't go into the details so that to verify all of that, and subsequently they then create a charge sheet, a preliminary charge sheet, and at that point of time then it is brought to court to say that this is the material that we have, because the SFIO will not file a complaint without any documents to verify their claim. So it won't be like an FIR, which, first information report, which usually is filed in cases where the Indian Penal Code is applicable, which is just the first statement of a person. Here the complaint which is filed in court is filed on the basis of documents which have been recovered by the SFIO. And it is at that stage that the accused are brought to court, and unfortunately, the twin conditions are applied to the accused at that point of time.
My other question was, so has there been any of your personal experience dealing with the SFIO with any of your clients?
I did, yeah, of course, I did a matter, and we look into all of these issues. And as I said, that was, I think, one of the first prosecutions to take place in the country. But at the same time, these issues did crop up. And as I said, one of the issues was the fact that once the complaint was filed by the SFIO, there was absolutely, and I said, 447, section 447 and 212 read together categorically state that no other agency can look into the offense of fraud of 447 the moment that kicks in. But it can't exist alone. It has to, if there is conspiracy that level 120B of the Indian Penal Code, which explains criminal conspiracy, will have to be attracted. And if criminal conspiracy is attracted, then would the SFIO, when it's filing a charge sheet, can it charge a person, or can it say that this person should be charged under 447 as well as 120B? One of the issues, of course, there was the issue of the twin conditions of bail that we argued, but unfortunately, it did not go in our favor. And till date, I don't think there was. I think there was one or two cases where bail was granted once by the Delhi High Court and once by the Punjab and Haryana High Court. The SFIO, but they were stayed by the Supreme Court on that very day, or the next one mentioning or something like that. So not much relief came to the accused in these prosecutions. Not till now. We have a hopeful future.
Okay, thank you for that. And does anybody have any other questions? I guess not. Okay, thank you so much, Abhilaksh, for taking out the time. This is really insightful. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.